on YouTube, Twitch, and on Twitter. We're giving Twitter Spaces a try to see how it goes. We are going to get into part 2, so while we have people joining us, be sure to drop your ASL in the chat. As you know, we get started every True Crime Convos with our ASL. We are so excited to have Bob back because we're going to be talking about part 2, essentially, of the Steven Avery case of making a murderer, and not really diving into the documentary itself, but really talking about kind of the legalities behind the case. We are so thankful to have Bob Motta on with us. He is, my favorite way to describe you, Bob, is by calling you what you call yourself, which is a recovering defense attorney. It's how I refer to you.
That is me.
When I spoke to Kirk Nurmi about you, I was like, he's also a recovering defense attorney. Because Kirk kind of went through the cycle of crap after the Jodi Arias verdict. So
he did.
Thank you, friends, for joining us here on Spotify Live True Crime Convos. I do want to just start off, everybody make sure you drop your ASL in the chat. I do want to start off with some news. I'm sure if you follow me on my social media, you may have seen it. But our contract with Spotify Live was not renewed. So after the end of September, I believe, is when our contract is over. So True Crime Convos will no longer exist on Spotify Live in that capacity. We're going to be moving over to a live stream format, still keeping it the same. We're going to make it a little bit more fun than what we can kind of do on Spotify Live. We're going to go to YouTube, Twitch, and maybe Fireside or something, and start doing maybe giveaways for like merch and stuff to make it fun for people and have a lot of,
I love giveaways. Can I win? Can I still win even if I'm like co-hosting or joining together?
Yes,
that's all that matters.
Absolutely.
Okay. I like winning.
Yeah, so Bob, go ahead and remind everybody who's new to the chat, joining us, where they can find you, what you do. Give us a background on you.
Okay, so first I'll give you my ASL.
Hold on. You're muted in Spotify Live.
I'm muted?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
No.
Okay.
Unmute yourself. Hold on, Bob's unmuting himself.
Sorry, guys. I'm very old and very technology driven. So yeah, my ASL is I'm 52. I'm an old man. I am a he, him, and I am located in the greater Chicagoland area. And I am the host of the podcast Defense Diaries, which I am a defense attorney. I'm trying to become a completely retired defense attorney turned podcaster. But I kind of take a real strong inclination of trying to teach people a little bit about the law and about how the criminal justice system works in the pod, all while trying to tell fascinating, exciting stories about cases that have a personal impact on me. My dad was John Wayne Gacy's lawyer, so the first season I did the Gacy case because he had given me those tapes that I had for 30 years. So, and from that, I then went to my second season, which is about a case I handled, a quadruple homicide out in Omaha, Nebraska, with a doctor known as Anthony Garcia. Tragic case, insane trial. And we're about 18 episodes into that season, and it's going so pretty well. People seem to like it. So, and then
love it.
Yeah, like I enjoy writing it, so and performing it, so it's a win-win. I really like this a lot better than practicing law, but in retrospect, I'm glad that I had the practice experience because I think I'm bringing something else to the table that some other podcasters can't do just because they're not lawyers. And for the true crime game, it's kind of unique, so it worked for me. So so that's basically it, and I'd love if y'all listen to the pod. So find us.
So basically where we left off last time is we went into kind of telling everybody about how Steven ended up in prison, how he was charged with first-degree intentional homicide and the mutilation of a corpse. Eventually was, convicted of that and then sentenced to life in prison. He didn't really have a lot of options until, especially for like post-conviction relief, right? Until Kathleen Zellner decided to take up his case. So Bob, let's get into it. Let's talk about where he is in terms of the appellate side.
All right. So oddly enough, and to be honest with you, I spent the better part of the day trying to find Kathleen's new filing because I would have loved to have been able to have read that in order to kind of inform you guys where she's going. I have a pretty good idea, but essentially where they're at, the way that it kind of works is once you're convicted in court, you then have 30 days to file what they call a notice of appeal. And obviously that was done. This case is old at this point. His original appeal was denied. At that point, once you kind of go through the appellate process, you enter into what they call the Post-Conviction Relief Act process. And that's what Kathleen is filing. She's filing, from what we've heard, she filed her third today in the courts. And basically what those Post-Conviction Relief Acts are is they're a last-ditch effort in order to try to get the thing up to a Supreme Court at some point, with the hopes that what they will end up doing is either exonerating them if they find the evidence compelling enough, or at the very least kicking it back to the trial court so that they can be retried. Now, typically what you need in terms of a Post-Conviction Relief Act is newly discovered evidence. Mm-hmm. So Kathleen has spent huge amounts of time and had to have been huge amounts of money on experts and private investigators just going down there, or up there rather, because she's actually her office is about 20 miles from mine. So I know Kathleen personally. And
you do?
Yeah, she's a hell of a lawyer. And she's a hell of a fighter. So I respect a lot of what she does. So, she went in, she found a bunch of new things. Like, frankly, I thought the second petition was strong enough that it should have been granted. But I think what we're seeing is that we're dealing with, a criminal justice system up in Wisconsin that is inclined to, stay with the status quo and, not upset the apple cart. And, they just don't realize that she's a fighter. She's not going away. And one thing about Kathleen Zellner, I followed her career, because she's amazing because she's not like a Harvard or Ivy League school educated, attorney. She went to Northern Illinois, which is, again, pretty close to my house, and it's a fine state school, but it's not considered to be one of the best schools in the country. And she just came out and she's crushing it. And she's crushing it because she's tenacious and because she cares, about justice, So at the end of the day, that's benefited her, and she's kind of locked into this niche where she's, really fighting for people that she believes are innocent. Mm-hmm. And I've seen her step away from cases where she'll dig in, she may start the appellate process, and then she'll realize, like, kind of midway through, like, I don't think this guy is really innocent. And then she'll back off. And that has not been the case with Steven Avery. Like, she has maintained from the beginning, and it's only grown stronger with her with respect to her belief that this guy really did not commit the murder. So,
let me ask you a question in that regard. So, mm-hmm. There was a Twitter discussion here recently, right, about, I think somebody had asked us when we were talking about, the upcoming show, that there's a difference between, like, actual innocence and, like, being found not guilty, right? Like, right. Actual innocence or whatever.
Correct.
Where do you think Zellner is landing on this? Like, do you think that she is like, oh, from a legality standpoint, like, oh, he completely never did this? Or is it just like they didn't prove that he did it? Like, he could have done it, they just didn't do their job correctly and prove it.
I think she's 100% in the actual innocence camp. I don't think that she thinks that procedurally that they like that's not her fight. Like her fight isn't where she's going in and, you know, saying that the state didn't meet their burden. You know, she's going in and saying this guy did not do this. And I think that kind of holds true with almost everything she handles. Like I rarely see her handling things where she's just, you know, arguing that procedurally the court made an error and, you know, by way of them making that error, they need to overturn the decision and send it back down to the trial court, which the result of an appeal like that, where you're saying that there was a prejudicial error that was made, is to basically send it back down and with a mandate by the appellate court that, okay, you can't use that piece of evidence that screwed up the first trial.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, because actually I just saw, she tweeted this week, she had a case that happened. Frankly, it was in the courthouse that I practice in all the time in Kane County, Illinois. And it was the case about the husband who was charged with murdering his wife, and he had placed her on the railroad tracks and had said that, you know, she had died of a heart attack up there. And, you know, and she won it on appeal, and it got tossed back. And she just tried the case, and he was found guilty again, despite the fact that they couldn't put in the same forensic evidence that they put in the first time. You know, I think with that, people were just, you know, they just weren't buying the story, because it so happened there was like some texting going on with the wife and some guy that she had met, and like she had joined the Army Reserves, and like there was some guy that she was, you know, pretty emotionally involved with over text and social media. And like that happened that night before. So I think that those two things happening so close in time were a tough sell to a jury in terms of them not believing, you know, because the timing is certainly suspicious, you know. So basically, yeah, I think she's going in on actual innocence. And the difference is, as you said, you know, you get a situation where, especially during like in a bench trial where the judge is the trier of fact as opposed to a jury, that's where you'll hear the judge say, well, you know, look, I'm not finding you innocent, even though they don't need to say it. They almost always do. I'm just finding the state didn't meet their burden. So I can't find you guilty because I'm going to abide by what the dictates of the law are.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm going to find you not guilty. But that's not saying that I don't think that you did this. I just don't think that they proved it. So, you know, I think with Avery, she's convinced herself, which is one of the perils of defense work, because, you know, if you put together a hell of a defense, or, you know, you start putting together evidence, you kind of start drinking your own Kool-Aid, and you can convince yourself that, you know, somebody didn't do something. But, you know, the more that piles in for her, I think the more all in she is on the concept that he didn't do it.
Yeah. So we talked about there being some kind of sketchy issues going on within the actual trial that making a murderer kind of put out there for everybody to see, which caused this huge uproar, right, within the public. But unfortunately, like, public appeal doesn't necessarily work for our justice system, meaning, like, it doesn't matter how many change.org signatures you have, it isn't going to sway a court opinion and, you know, determining if a person is going to get an appeal approved or anything like that. Talk to me about why this may be a huge problem. Okay, so we mentioned that there was this article in People magazine that's published. There's two jurors that had a relationship with Manitowoc County. One was related to a sheriff's deputy, and the other one was a juror's wife who was employed with Manitowoc County. So why is that a problem?
Well, I mean, the potential for conflict is just way too evident. Like when I go in and I'm selecting a jury, you know, before I even get to do what they call voir dire, where I get to ask the juror questions, try to get an understanding of who they are personally a little bit, you know, because I mean, it's, you know, a jury trial is a very personal thing at the end of the day. And like you're trying to connect with jurors, you've got two storytellers, one for the state, one for the defense, that are trying to make a connection with these jurors, because ultimately you want the jurors to say, you know what, I believe that guy as opposed to that woman,
Right.
for the state, so before that happens, typically what the judge does is they will go through a litany of questions. And many times the first questions they ask are, do you know any of the participants in the trial? Like, do you know the lawyers? Do you know me, the judge? Do you know the bailiffs? Do you know anybody in the courtroom? Do you know the clerks? And, they'll ask the jurors, the prospective jurors, to raise their hands and say yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
If they do, they stand up and they say what the relationship is. So I'm sure that the judge and that's all on the record. So like the court reporter's in there for that, for the voir dire. So I guess we'll see if the judge actually asks those questions, because certainly they ask questions about, do you have a relationship with any of the police involved? And then they'll name the police that'll be testifying at trial.
Mm-hmm.
So, if those things were asked and jurors just avoided the question or didn't answer the question, it becomes a problem, especially if they heard the question and they ignored it, because then it tells you either one, they're wanting to serve on the jury, or, the feeling is going to be that the fix is in. You know what I mean? It's like, you just can't have people. You want blank slates. You want like just an unadulterated piece of clay in there, so that, as a juror, so you can mold them, with your set of the facts. You don't want them coming in predisposed. I mean, that's the biggest thing we worry about is attorneys, is like, we really just want unbiased jurors, so we can just tell our stories, give them the evidence, and let them make a decision based on what they've heard. And, when you have people that are predisposed for whatever reason, and having a relationship with either of those two people is going to be a problem, potentially. It reeks of collusion, and, you just can't have that. So, I mean, that's why potentially it's kind of bombshell information,
Yeah. So par for the course, right, for these types of documentaries. We've seen it with Abducted in Plain Sight. We've seen it with A Girl in the Picture now, and we saw it with Making a Murderer, where these magnifying glasses on the people involved, whether they're great or not, these magnifying glasses are put over everybody. It's put on the defense attorneys, on the prosecutors, and especially the investigators who are collecting the evidence, right? And the way that Making a Murderer framed that, even after the documentary came out, there was even concerns that the documentarians weren't partial like they should have been, because of their own, intermingling with whoever they were. I forgot who they were intermingling with, but we saw, there were people who vilified some of them. The law enforcement side for sure was not exempt. They were attacked left and right. We have what I would consider to be villains in this story. And one of those guys is Andrew Colburn. He ended up filing a lawsuit against the producers of the Making a Murderer documentary for basically defaming the department. Right. So Colburn claimed that the documentary showed a distorted version of events and portrayed him as a corrupt officer who tried to frame Avery. And I wasn't aware of this until I saw Dean Strand, or Jerry, it wasn't Dean, it was Jerry.
It was Jerry.
Was saying oh my gosh, I'm so glad that he's going to be deposed, right?
Right.
Because, now he has to kind of answer under oath, et cetera, although we've seen where, law enforcement lies under oath, so I don't know that necessarily compels somebody to be truthful. But what kind of potential impact could that case have on Stevens?
Well, it depends on what they uncover. So the difference between a deposition and trial is, when I'm deposing somebody, I can go way, way further in my questioning than I would be able to in a court of law, where I have a judge sitting there. So that's not to say that the opposing counsel can't object to my question, but what they do is that they still can answer it. Like I always tell them, so their attorney may object, and I say, well, you can still answer, and then they can certify the question. And then what happens after the fact is you can go into court and argue with the judge whether or not that answer should stand. But, that being the case in a deposition, in a civil case, if they get some smoking gun evidence, it can be extremely helpful. I mean, it's one of those things where he is going to be the attorneys for Netflix, who are going to be, I'm assuming, pretty relatively high-powered attorneys that know what the hell they're doing in there, are going to be going at him pretty hard. And, you can bet your ass that they've reviewed every ounce of tape that they have of Colburn. I mean, they've seen everything that Netflix filmed, because the defense to defamation is, of course, truth. Right. So if they can prove that what they were, portraying in the documentary was true, then, they're going to be able to, win that case. But no matter which way it goes, they potentially could get some very damaging, because basically what you're looking for is to trip him up. Like he's not going to come there and spill his guts and say, oh yeah, well, I planted the key. I definitely planted that key. Like you're not going to get an admission like that. So you're going to have to kind of put things together by tripping him up. So hopefully they did their homework and they prepped heavily. Because I think Jerry was tweeting, he was calling it like, it's deposition day. He was really excited about getting him in there. About it. Yeah. So like, and I'm anxious to read it. I'd like to really kind of be able to dig into that and see what they were able to uncover. But, I think that, and in fairness, as much as I love that documentary, like the first one in particular was certainly slanted towards the defense. I mean, like they wanted it to appear that, he was innocent, that he was framed. I mean, like I certainly walked away from that. What I most walked away from that was infuriated at that piece of shit defense attorney that was representing Brendan Dassey. That guy was like a blight. Like that's the guy that gives defense attorneys a bad name, because no defense attorney worth his salt would ever have his own client confess to some PI. I mean, it was.
I know, and then
it was the most obscene thing I ever saw.
And interrogate him, and it
was incredible.
With his permission, and
I couldn't believe it.
I think when we talk about the Brendan Dassey thing, I think more people are more sure that Brendan had nothing to do with it than they are with Steven. Like, even for me, it's really difficult for me to go, okay, well, if Steven didn't do it, then who did and why on his property? Like, somebody would have to have known that she was going to be there at that time, that, there was a burn pit, all this stuff. Like, all of these things had to align in order for it to happen. So I'm not, for myself, 100% sure on that. Like, I would probably be the juror that's like, there's reasonable doubt here, but there's not enough for me on either side to convict or to say didn't do it. For Brendan, 100%, for me, I would be like, there's no way this kid did it. He just doesn't have the capacity.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I don't, and the timing of how that worked out with him, walking up the driveway and like going to check the mail and, this whole concept that, he knocked on his uncle's door because they had a piece of his mail and he's naked and like drags him back to the bedroom.
He's like,
and
he's got, since you're here, thanks for the mail.
Come on and help me murder this woman. It'll be a blast. It's implausible. And then when you really listen to his recitation of what he considered the facts and you look at what the evidence wants, they just don't match up at all. It's like, you can tell that this was a kid that was completely malleable. Like, he was able to be, coaxed and pushed and prodded by the police and, their gentle way, to get him to say what they needed him to say. And ultimately he did, it was enough. So I just don't think that any of that fits in with kind of how the fact pattern laid out. And, and Kathleen has spent, like I said, a huge amount of money and resources on experts. She's convinced that those were not bones that were in the burn barrel at all. It's not hard to see that she's clearly pointing the finger at Bobby Dassey. Like, I think that the third petition where she did everything but basically come out and say it in the second petition, which was kind of the focus of part 2. In this third petition, I have an inkling that she is flat out coming out and saying that Bobby Dassey is the one who did this, and which is unusual in the sense that, you know, they originally had the entire crew in there for the documentary filming, you know, Dassey's mother and also Scott, you know, the husband, who like she was thrown under the bus as well, and you know, but the whole Bobby Dassey thing, and apparently they dug up a witness that, like, I think we talked about it briefly in part 1 of this, where, you know, he was entering a convenience store, saw this flyer on the window of the convenience store. There happened to be a cop in there who happened to be Colburn. And he walked up to the cop and he's like, "Hey man, I just want to let you know, I just passed that vehicle," you know, and gave him the area where he passed it, and it was parked like off the side of the road. And it happened to be like right in front of like Scott's property. And like the story was that Bobby Dassey had left the house to go hunting over at his property. That is what the story was. Like that's what he testified to at court, that, "Oh yeah, I left. I saw her, you know, her car was still there, you know, when I left the house," which I think that they were able to prove was an absolute lie, that the car was gone. And it sounds like he was following her. I'm all over this Bobby Dassey thing. Yeah. Because the shit they found on his computer.
Give us a glimpse into that.
So when they finally, and it was the household computer, but Bobby Dassey's the one who used it. Like he's the guy who was on there all the time. The mother wasn't necessarily on there. I don't think Brenda was ever on there. And they just found like horrific shit, like torture porn. They found like tons of videos of women being beaten and murdered, and kiddie porn, like pedophilia shit. It was like all the sick shit that you'd expect somebody who might be capable of this type of thing to kind of be looking at, you know. It was kind of some warped stuff. And it was a lot of it, like a ton of it. It wasn't like, you know, like a few different files. It was thousands of files. Like this guy spent a lot of time doing that. You know, and it kind of gives you like a view into the mind's eye, you know, and kind of shows you where that guy's head's at. So I'm super anxious to read that.
Watching that type of porn, like we're big here in our group, right? That we don't kink shame people for whatever they like, as long as there's consenting adults. And so when people are creating that type of genre, if you will, of pornography, it's not as concerning to me as the other stuff, right? Which is the kids stuff, right? Because I'm like, listen, there's people who are like super into BDSM and they take it to a whole new level, but they're consenting, so who really cares? But when it comes to the other stuff, there's obviously something bigger there that lends itself to predatory behavior, so it would make sense. Devin in the chat and Spotify Live said that she's convinced that she doesn't think that Steven did it. And she said that when I asked her, you know, like why, she goes, well, you know, the cops knew his family for years. I'm sure that's not the first time they've been on their property. And that's a good and valid point. But if we're pointing to somebody within the family, then it makes all the more sense, right? That they had the means, motive, and opportunity. Like Teresa, unfortunately, was just at the wrong place. At the wrong time. Devin also asks is, can we prove that all of the things that we found or that were found on Bobby's computer weren't planted?
Yeah, I mean, who's planting it? You know what I mean? So it's like the original search of the computer was done by law enforcement. Mm. So they have no motive to frame Bobby Dassey.
Right, when
that's
they
the
pegged
last thing.
Steven.
That's the last thing they want to do. So, the fact of the matter is, I think that Jerry and Dean were complaining that the state didn't even turn that over to them.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the things that Kathleen was beefing about, because she, and it's kind of par for the course. I mean, she had to attack, Dean and Jerry with ineffective assistance of counsel. I mean, that's just kind of how it goes, and it's like, and as much as everyone kind of fell in love with them, I mean, the bottom line is they were merely competent. They weren't like I watched it. I'm like, I mean, they're not like amazing lawyers and geniuses. They're just two guys who actually did what they're supposed to do as defense attorneys,
Right.
And it's like,
well,
and it's surprising
there's
when people see
strategy, right, that they could have used of pointing the finger to another person and saying, like, you may think it's this person, like you may think it's Steven, but here's another viable,
Right.
Suspect for it. So you introduce the someone else did it defense.
Right, which is, not as easy to get in as you'd think. Like the judge has to, like, pre-trial, and that's where all the wars take place at trial, is really before trial. Like when people are watching trials on headline news or, wherever they're broadcasting law and crime, it's like you're seeing the end result of 2 years of battle that have gone on in the courtroom prior to it being tried, where the defense attorney and the prosecutor are arguing about what's going to be allowed into evidence. Like that all takes place before trial. And frankly, it's really where the most interesting stuff happens, much more so than trial, because you're just seeing the end results. It's like I'm doing in Garcia. I'm going to be introducing all the evidence that I was not allowed to bring in per the judge. So I'm going to lay out the entire state's case, but I'm going to also lay out our entire case because I want my listeners to come back and say, hey, this is where I'm landing on it. I'm not going to give a final opinion as to whether or not I believe Anthony did it or he didn't do it, but I'm going to expect my listeners to sound up and check in and say, yo, this is where I'm landing on this thing. Cause I'm curious. I want to know. It's like, I'm considering all my listeners to be my jury, and if they come back saying, well, you didn't convince me, then so be it. You know what I mean? But it's like I just want everything heard so that people can make an informed decision. And it's kind of the same thing with this case. It's where, it was, there was certainly a lot of things that were left out in the defense, and, it's a big risk. It's a huge, big deal when the defense attorney is going to turn around and point the finger at law enforcement. It's like you have the prosecutor sitting there stomping and pounding their feet saying, oh, that this is like a major accusation and,
right.
They better have some proof of it. And the judge is doing the same thing. They're like, this is a serious accusation. I think that we're finally moving away from that, where there's just this carte blanche where law enforcement just goes in and you're expected to believe them because they're a cop. Well, that's bullshit. It's like, like people have finally started to realize cops are full of shit. Like they just are, they cheat and, they do dirty shit all the time because they're trying to close cases, because that's how they rise up in the ranks. That's how they get promotions. That's how they become detectives, is by closing cases. So, it's not even necessarily, going in and stealing money from drug dealers. It's worse than that. It's the ones where they're trying to close cases. And, it's like the one thing that Dean Strange said that, or Strang said that has always kind of resonated with me. And he's like, cops, they don't frame people that they think are innocent. That doesn't mean that they don't frame innocent people, because they do if they're framing the wrong person, but they typically are trying to frame who they think did it. Like that's who they're trying to frame, So it's one of those things where that was their big shot. That were, as opposed to some other guy did it defense, because I don't think that they had the time to develop that yet. Because they were so focused on how did they cheat? What did they do? Like they spent all their time and resources on trying to figure out exactly how the cops, got the blood in the RAV4, how this key was missed, how this bullet shows up all of a sudden, all those things where they just, were trying to show that the cops manufactured this evidence just so they could point it at, Steven. And then, that's kind of where they had to lay, and the argument for the state became, hey, look, in order for you to, believe the defense's story, you've got to be sitting here thinking and believing that these 20, 30-year-old, career officers have taken it upon themselves to frame this guy, for no good reason. They're willing to put their entire careers at risk to do that. And,
the general public would not believe somebody would do that somebody would risk their career just to lie. But framing it in the way that you did just now, and Devin, same thing. She's like, but he kind of made them look bad from the, first case with the being actually innocent of the crime that he was convicted of, right? And seeking relief for that. And, basically bankrupting Manitowoc County if that were to go through at the amount that he wanted, right?
Right.
It's interesting.
And I mean, that's their motive. Like, that is always the underlying motive there. That the overarching theme is that he had a, $36 million lawsuit pending, and he was going to win a shit ton of money. The guy spent 18 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, so like, which is, I think I said this on the last one, like, that's the problem I have with believing Avery's the guy. There's just, he had this windfall that was coming to him. He had just gotten out of prison after 18 years. And, more importantly, like, when I watched part 2, and they have Steven on there a lot, and he was in there like on part 1 a lot. And I've personally been in the room with sociopaths. I've seen them. I've looked in their eyes. I've had long discussions with them, and you can tell, you can just tell if they're off. Like, it's like, I've never met one where I was like, God damn, that guy's super normal. Like, I just can't believe how normal that guy is. It's right. Like, I've never gotten that feeling. And like, Avery just seems like kind of a schmucky dude, like a normal Wisconsin dude, man. Yeah. Like a dude who eats a lot of cheese and watches the Packers on Sunday, that's like, that's what he does, And so I've just never got that vibe. And with the money coming in, the fact that he just got out of prison, and the fact that there's a documentary crew that's filming him and all up his ass all the time, those 3 things just make it implausible to me, short of him being a complete socio/psychopath that is compulsed to kill, like, and I just don't get that vibe off of him.
You would see it. He would have to have kind of the same approach to killing as like Gary Ridgway, for instance. Like, you would have to believe that this wasn't his first instance of committing a murder. Right. He didn't just escalate that one day. So when we had Dr. Merkin on last time, she made some really great points of like elaborating on like what a psychopath was and what a sociopath was, and how there's these different implications that go into each individual, right? So there's not a one size fits all when it comes to these diagnoses and these how they present themselves. But one thing that always kind of rings true is that when it's this big of an issue or this big of an event, this isn't the first time something that like this has happened. And he had nothing but petty stuff happen. We've seen these escalations, right? But if we're only taking into account the attempted kidnapping situation,
which was with a family member, like this is like a family beef that like she blew out like what happened and what went down and turned it into something like, when you read that shit on paper, it's shocking to the conscience. It seems like when you read it on paper, you're like, ooh, that's fucking crazy. But
people who have family drama like that.
Oh my God. Like, I don't know anybody that doesn't have family drama like that.
If you've ever called the cops on your sibling, i.e. me, I've done it before. I was like, you guys don't understand. I was like, I'll call the cops on anybody. I'll call it on you or me. I call the cops on my own brother. He's super drunk. So it was a long time ago, but still.
It happens all the time.
Yeah. Man. And I mean, you wouldn't look at me and be like, oh my God, I bet you she's called the cops on a family member before. And I'm like, I have family members who are in law enforcement, right? I have a retired police officer cousin. I have an active police officer cousin. I support them, love them. But after seeing, so there's what I was going to say is there's this huge thing that's happening now where the public is coming to the realization, like you mentioned, that police officers are willing to lie under oath, right? We saw that in that Baltimore mockumentary, if you will, or series that was on HBO Max. There's actually, if you guys are on TikTok at all, and watch TikTok, there's actually this thing happening now where this woman's going through a custody battle and her neighbors are somehow involved. But the police officers, she was being arrested under false pretenses, essentially, for assault that never happened. It was later dismissed when she went and was arraigned in front of a judge. But the arresting officers said that she was under the influence of drugs and alcohol, that she was trying to bring drugs and alcohol with her to the jail, that there was feces all over the house. Her kids were like unkempt. They hadn't eaten in hours, and it was just a mess, and that she was erratic and naked, etc. Yeah. And they were perpetuating this story. They even told CPS this story. And then when she actually went to court for a part of her custody hearing, the arresting officers got on the stand, all stuck to their story, and the defense attorney was like, would you be surprised if your body cam footage didn't show this, that any of this happened? And I don't think that they anticipated that was going to be a thing. Yeah. I'm sure the prosecution knew, right, because of Brady.
Which is idiotic. How could they not think that they would use the body cam?
Yeah,
you know? I mean,
they did. And they were like, oh, that's not how I recalled it happening. I'm like, she was perfectly fine, calm and normal, clothed. Kids were fine. They had beds. There was no feces. There was no drugs or alcohol. Right. It was completely
the diametric opposite of what they said.
Yeah, and they're sitting on the stand going, well, that's not how I remembered it. Yeah. And then it caused CPS obviously to intervene because, I mean, they're taking law enforcement's word for it, as right. they should in the beginning, right? Because they're the ones who are supposed to be this neutral party that's walking in and saying, like, yes, these kids are at risk, we should remove them. Right. And it became this huge shit show. And, you know, now it's kind of interesting because now she's a little bit in trouble for talking about, from the judge. The judge is upset that she went on her TikTok and was talking about the trial and was talking about the witnesses. But I'm confused by that because anybody could get a transcript right. of that proceeding. And
yeah. So I think what the judge's issue is not that she's going on TikTok and talking about what is otherwise a public hearing, mm-hmm. but that she's doing it during the actual litigation. Mm. Like that's what judges have a problem with. It's like in any cases that I try, they typically, if it's high profile, they seal us off from the media. They don't want us speaking to the media because they don't want word getting out. If people want to come and view the trial, they can do that. Mm-hmm. And after the trial, she's more than welcome to talk about all of it. But, the judges are always worried about public opinion. Yeah. Because there was a case in the county that I live in that was insane, where it was kind of the same thing was happening. And, they were gaslighting the wife, and the husband was into, everyone thinking that she was a crazy woman. She's mm-hmm. a crazy, hysterical woman. And, and she kept trying to tell everybody, she's like, this guy is going to kill my kid. She's going to kill our kid. I'm telling you, he's a violent predator. And like, everyone's just buying the shit that he's selling to you guys, including the GIL. So she was launching on the guardian ad litem, who is somebody that's hired in order to represent the children's interest, right. because you have the two parents that are represented by attorneys. So they have a third party come in and represent the kids' interest. She was like roasting on them. Like, you guys didn't do your job, the way you got hoodwinked by this guy. And then, like, unbelievably, the kid dies while he's in the custody of his father. And it was like a nightmare for the judges that were involved, because a judge recused himself. So it's kind of like a similar thing. And in terms of being in the position of that woman where they've been gaslit like that, and where they've lost their kids based on complete and utter bullshit. I mean, I don't blame her, we have this avenue of social media to be able to kind of launch and get your story out there on a massive level.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I certainly don't blame her for doing it. You know,
I don't either.
like, you know, if you're in a situation where, you know, you're getting fucked, and the only way that you can get your story out is by going onto your socials and doing it and saying it and getting people, you know, to notice what's going on, and, you know, get some kind of public outcry going and being like, what the, you know what I mean? So I see where the judge is coming from in terms of, you know, but if it's getting, and she was clearly right, you know, I mean, that's the other thing. She clearly was right, you know, that these cops were fucking lying assholes, and that, you know, they were taking her kids away from her, saying that she was a monster and
Right.
completely neglectful to her kids, you know. So, I mean, I guess she did what she had to do, and, like, I don't blame her, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So we are anxiously awaiting, obviously, the contents of what is in Connor's petition.
Oh man, I can't wait.
We said previously that the claims, right, had focused on ineffective assistance of counsel, Brady violations, which are huge, and I would think that that would be like a better reason to move forward with approving an appeal, being like, hello, we didn't get the evidence. So
Right.
I was surprised that, I don't know, I'm always compelled when I read these, you know, things that are submitted. I'm always surprised that if they convince me, I'm like, how is that not enough? Just like one iota of like something being wrong.
Yeah.
Why don't we want to get it right? Like, why don't we just want to go through it again and say, like, okay, to be sure, let's just make sure we did everything right? Like, is it a human error thing, or is it just like we're too bogged down within our court system that we can't afford to do something like that?
I think it's a combination of all of it. I think that the way, and, you know, politics play a huge part of it. It's like when you look at when Dassey's Innocence Project attorneys went in and argued that in the Seventh Circuit here in Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you could easily tell when they played the audio from the judges that were on the panel, and they ended up getting all of the judges there, and they had to get a majority of them in order to have the thing, you know, like, get granted. And
Mm-hmm.
when you would hear them speak, you'd hear clearly conservative jurists up there, you know, who are like pro law enforcement, and they're, you know, so they're going in with the mindset that I don't think the cops did this shit. You know what I'm saying? So they're angling towards that, and, you know, and then they're finding like they're pigeonholing the defense into saying, well, you know, you're trying to change the way that cops are doing their job, you know, because they didn't believe that they were overly zealous in the interrogation with Brendan. You know, they, like, the one judge was like, you know, I thought they were very reasonable. They weren't raising their voices. They didn't abuse him. They didn't touch him. You know, it's like, I'm like, it doesn't have to be that way, you know?
Yeah.
So it was like, it, you know.
But I don't understand, and this is probably just like for the universe to one day answer, right? Maybe not for Bob Motta. Maybe you'll try. But I don't understand, if we know that it happens, why we think it's impossible in this situation.
Yeah, it
makes no sense. Like, you can
it makes zero
law
sense. It's
enforcement.
like, Lanie, I sit there watching the same shit you do, like, befuddled all the time.
Yeah.
I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? I'm like, are they looking at the same shit that I'm looking at? And then I'll always do my research, you know, like, if I watch a doc, I always watch it with a grain of salt, assuming that the documentarian may have been framing it in a certain way, or putting something, you know,
Right,
not quite in the exact same. Yeah, you're right. Or, you know, they've come to the conclusion that they believe that the person's innocent, so they're going to frame the entire documentary from that viewpoint. And, you know, so I'll go in and I'll try to actually look at the documents. I'll try to look at what they've, you know, what was discovered, and, you know, read it within the context it should be read, and then kind of see where I lay from there. And, you know, it's like, it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. It's like, you know, this concept that, you know, somebody's found guilty at trial, that they're going to be able to just go get it overturned and appeal, is incredibly difficult. Incredibly difficult, you know. And like, you look at, like, the amount of work, and, like, the best thing about what's going on with Avery is it's like the perfect case study of exactly what we're talking about, because
Right.
Zellner could not be pulling up more competent and persuasive exculpatory evidence than she is, and she's still getting nothing accomplished. They're just ignoring the evidence, and they'll take the easy route. Like typically what happens with appellate courts is they'll find the easiest avenue to deny it on, whether it's a procedural issue or they find it to be harmless error. Because like typically that's what they'll say. They'll say, well, it may be the fact that this wasn't introduced, or the state didn't turn this over, and it could be considered a Brady violation. But we find even if it had been turned over, that it would not have swayed the jury. You know what I mean? So they're always trying to find that kind of legal loophole where they can hang their hat on it in their decision, where they're not really addressing the issues. And it's like, I know we talked about the West Memphis 3 thing that's going on with them testing the evidence, and like, let's just see what the fuck's out there. Let's test it and see what the fuck's going on with it. Like, I think everyone wants to know. The public wants to know at large. I think the victims' families want to know.
Yeah, they're the ones who deserve to know. So I would
totally.
Like you're advocating on the side of victims by doing that, to be like,
exactly. I mean, they deserve to know.
They were the ones who did it, right? Then we could say, like, for sure we got it right the first time.
We got it right.
All this media that was going on was just a farce, and it made you believe this, and so be careful next time of just believing the media as it is.
Right.
Or saying, whoops, we got it wrong, and we vilified and ruined these children's lives because they were kids.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, it's a whole thing. I'm curious for you. Right, we're starting to see a lot more, like, court TV went away from cable news, but now it's back, right, on streaming platforms like Law and Crime is. I'm curious for you, how you feel from a defense attorney's perspective of having these trials live streamed.
I love it. I think that, I just... like right now, I feel like we're kind of entering the golden age of defense attorneys. Like, we've been shit on for so long and seen as like bottom feeder scumbags trying to get people off on technicalities. And it's just not what we do. Like, all the true crime content that we all consume and have been consuming for the last 20, 30 years is always driven by the prosecution and interviews with cops. That's it. That's the side of the story we always hear. And now the trend is like, okay, well, we're starting to realize cops are full of shit. So maybe we should look at the other side of this. And it's like an entire, like, huge well of untapped content where we're going to start being able to hear the other side of things. And, like, people will get a better understanding of what it is that criminal defense attorneys do. It's like, because you have to understand that 90% of cases do not go to trial. Like, what you're seeing going to trial are cases where there's actually contested facts. You're not seeing, you're never going to see a case that goes to trial unless I've got a defendant who's just adamant that they're going to trial, even though I'm telling them, like, look, man, you've got a huge amount of evidence that we're not going to be able to overcome at trial. And I said, and you're going to get hit with a trial tax, and the judge is going to sentence you more than, the state is offering you. It's a bad idea. And he's like, fuck it, I don't care. I want to go to trial. Right. That rarely happens. I'm typically able to get some common sense through my client's brain. And they realize, okay, like, as much as I don't want to do the time, I probably shouldn't have done the crime. You know what I mean? But like where you have a situation where there's you've got a client that comes in and says, I didn't do this, man. I didn't do it. And people read a lot into those trials. Like, people read into the fact that the defendant didn't testify. And like, there's a jury instruction that is read to the jury afterwards that you are not allowed to factor in the fact that the defendant didn't testify as indicia of guilt. You can't do it. Like, you cannot allow that, because there's a million reasons I wouldn't let my defendant, like, I never want my defendants to testify, because if they come off shitty, even if they're completely innocent, it leaves a bad taste in the juror's mouth. And we're dealing with human beings that are jurors that, kind of go with their gut feelings. They're like, oh, that guy was a total, jerk off, and I couldn't stand him. And, like, I I think he did it, and they'll base it on things that aren't necessarily the evidence. And, a lot of times that happens by way of the defendant testifying. So,
Yeah.
I
And they don't
love
do themselves any favors too. I mean,
they don't.
I honestly, for me, that if I were ever on trial, 100% would always rather have a bench trial than a jury trial.
Yeah.
I am so amazed that more people don't do bench trials, and I guess maybe it's because they think like, oh, I'll be able to sway the jury by just being myself, and like I'll be able to give off the right emotions. I think that, I guess I'll pose this to you, because I saw you tweet about it recently about Casey Anthony, right?
Yeah.
And the verdict that shocked the nation because everybody believed that she was guilty. Do you think that outcome may have been different had she had a bench trial?
I don't know. It's like potentially, because I mean, really, like the argument for a jury trial is that, you technically only need 1 out of 12 to get a mistrial,
Right.
to get a hung jury. Doesn't mean they're not going to try you again. It depends on the strength of the case. And, a lot of times if the state's really hot for you, they'll retry the case. But, if the evidence is substantially similar, it's like what they did with Russ Faria and, the Betty Faria.
And that prosecutor just continues.
Oh my God.
To believe, even to this day, still thinks he did it, even though Pam Hupp is literally the person who did do it.
I mean,
a question though for you is, in regards to the jury kind of walking in when we're doing the voir dire process, do you really believe that they go in there in the courtroom with a mindset not to take into consideration if the defendant chooses to testify or not testify?
I mean, all I can do is hope, because I ask them, like, those are the kind of questions I focus on. And voir dire, I'll say, look, like the things I concern myself with them, like, are you going to be able to withstand the pressure if you have a different mindset than, say, the other 11 juries? Are you going to be able to stand your ground, or are you going to be pushed around, and are you going to, let them sway you and change your mind, based on the fact that they're just putting pressure on you, or, and I'll ask that question. Do you understand that you can't, and we'll ask questions like, are you coming in to this courtroom today at the very beginning of this entire process with the mindset that the fact that they were arrested, that the defendant has been arrested, that they must have done something wrong?
Right.
You know what I mean? Because that's what people think. Like regular people think, oh well, he got arrested, so he must have done some shit. You know what I'm saying? And like, so you're having to start the fight like there. And I don't want jurors like, and I love honest jurors. Like I always tell them, I'm like, all any of us want on this side of the courtroom is just to be honest. If you feel like you can't be unbiased, then tell us, because you're not who we want on the jury, either side. We don't want biased jurors. We want people coming in with a truly open mind.
Right.
And, and I feel like, as much as people, kind of like say, oh God, I got a jury summons. That's the fucking last thing I want to do is go sit there for a week.
I want it so bad.
I mean, right. It's like, I always tell people, I'm like, you don't understand that once you get in there, and I don't care what kind of case it is, it could be anything. When you kind of get in and dig into the minutia of it, it becomes fascinating. And like people, like as the process continues, you can see that they're taking it seriously. So, it's like they go back there. That doesn't mean they're always deciding on the right factors. Like Allison and I are always trying to hunt down jurors if we lose a case, to find out, what went wrong. Where did we lose you? What was the fact that got you? And some answer, some don't. I mean, we're not trying to stalk people, but like we certainly want to know, because it's informative. But so, I mean, I can only hope, what I mean? It's like, I try to figure out as much as I can about those jurors and kind of what their politics are and, kind of how they handle everything. And then, from there, it's always a crapshoot. I mean, you only get so many challenges where you can kick jurors off, prospective jurors off. So it's like, you never know, so all you can do is hope. It's like, that's what they always say. You never know what a jury's going to do, ever.
True.
Like,
They surprise you at every turn.
They really do.
Well, friends, so we are at the end of our time, but I really do want to quickly say, in case you missed our announcement earlier at the top of the show, Spotify Live is not continuing our contract at the end of September, so that's effectively when True Crime Convos will end officially from the Spotify Live side. But we are going to continue to stream on our other platforms, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, etc., and revamp True Crime Convos and have more conversations like this. We just announced the next location for the True Crime Podcast Festival in 2023. It's going to be in Austin, Texas. Make sure you follow us on social media if you want to attend. TCPF for this year is happening next Friday. Bob's going to be in town. He's going to be doing a live panel and a round table. Gary, who's in the chat as well, he hosts the Truck Stop Murder podcast. He's going to be doing a Spotify Live show. If you're interested, the thing we're trying to do in collaborating with Spotify Live is to make sure, those who can attend the festival this year have an opportunity to kind of sit in on a live podcast recording, and listeners also get to kind of interact in the chat, etc. So we're excited to offer that opportunity for podcasters who are attending and for people who aren't attending the festival this year. I am so excited, Bob, to see you in a week's time.
Super, super excited.
It's going to be so much fun. We're going to have a blast.
I'm so ready for it.
Yes, but it's been such a fun time being on Spotify Live. We ushered in this kind of new era of live streaming with live audio, so it's always been a fun time. I love the Spotify family, and you can still catch me on True Crime Fan Club, Crimes of Passion, and the It's Haunted What Now podcast. And then, of course, Bob, let everybody know where they can find you. If you're on our Facebook or Twitter or Twitch, you're seeing the ticker go by where it shows you where you can follow Bob. If you're in Spotify Live, you can click on his profile and see where you can follow him on Twitter.
Yeah, and as far as the pod, we're on all the platforms. So, it's just Defense Diaries. You'll find us. We're there for you. As far as Facebook and Instagram, it's at Defense Diaries. And we love having people on there. We try to put up some fun content, and, we try to throw in some interesting stuff as well. So, and we love to hear from listeners. So we enjoy that.
Well, thank you, Bob, as usual, for joining me.
I love doing it. Why do the hours go so fast? I can't believe it's over again. It's insane.
I told you, Dallas PD is going to be there for you and Charlie's. You're right after, so I'll send Joe King on stage. And
to bounce us.
Yeah.
I don't blame him.
So we'll have to come back for part 3. True Crime Convos is not ending. So we'll have to come back for part 3 to discuss whatever is in that, filing that Kathleen sent. And maybe we can cross our fingers and get Kathleen on so we can all kind of chat about. I mean, I don't know. I don't think she will, right? Because of
she might. It depends. Litigation. It depends on what it depends on what the stance of the litigation.
Maybe we can get Kirk on.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, friends. Well, thank you, Bob, as usual, for joining me. I love and adore you. I can't wait to see you in a week. And friends on Spotify Live and all of our other streaming platforms, thank you so much for joining us. When we revamp True Crime Convos, we are going to have options for giveaway, so please don't forget to subscribe, save, like, do whatever you got to do so you're always reminded when True Crime Convos goes live. I'm excited to see you, and I love you, and I hope you have a great evening. Bye, friends.
You too. Peace.